Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're going to be taking a look at machine identity security. This is something that I know you're interested in as you think about how to boost your server security, especially with everything moving towards containers these days.
Yeah, you're spot on to be thinking about this now. It's definitely an area that often gets overlooked, but it's absolutely crucial in today's landscape.
Yeah, for sure. And to help us out today, we're using some insights from an expert blog on CIM, that's Customer Identity and Access Management. Now, I get the customer identity part, but what's this about machines needing their own IDs?
Well, that's the fascinating part. We're so used to thinking about cybersecurity just in terms of human users, but in reality, machines need secure access just as much. Think of all the servers, applications, even algorithms that are constantly interacting on your network. Each one needs a way to prove its identity and be authorized to access specific resources.
Okay, so it's not just about protecting data from hackers anymore. It's about making sure the machines themselves are who they say they are.
Exactly. Think about how many API keys your systems probably use. It's likely a nightmare to keep track of. And those are just one example of machine identities. There are also things like SSH keys, digital certificates. It's like every machine needs its own digital passport to operate securely.
So if I understand correctly, these machine identities are what allow, say, my server to prove it's really my server and not some imposter trying to steal data or cause chaos.
Precisely. It's all about authentication and authorization. Just like you need a passport to travel to another country, machines need these digital IDs to prove their identity, get verified, and access the resources they need.
Okay, yeah, this has already given me a whole new perspective on cybersecurity. But with so many machines, so many different types of IDs, how do we even begin to manage all of this? It sounds incredibly complex.
Yeah, it can be, which is why we have solutions like privileged access management, or PAM for short, to help us out.
Okay, PAM. I've heard that term before, but honestly, it's always sounded a bit intimidating, like something only huge corporations need to worry about.
Not necessarily. PAM is fundamentally about controlling and protecting access to your most critical data and systems. Think of it as a security system specifically designed for machine identities.
Well, not just a vault, but like a whole security team dedicated to managing these digital passports for all my machines.
That's a great way to put it. And one of the key principles PAM uses is something called least privilege. This means a user or system, in this case a machine, is only given the absolute minimum access they need to do their job and nothing more.
I like the sound of that already. So less is more, security-wise, but how does that actually work in practice?
Okay, so think of it like giving someone a key to your house, but only to access the mailbox, not the entire house. You're limiting their access to only what's absolutely necessary.
That makes sense. So if one of my servers only needs to access a specific database, it doesn't get the keys to the entire kingdom, so to speak. But doesn't that create a lot of overhead in terms of managing all those individual permissions?
It could, but thankfully, PAM systems are designed to handle this complexity. They provide centralized credential management, acting like a secure vault for all those SSH keys, API tokens, and certificates.
So rather than having these credentials scattered all over the place, they're all neatly organized and managed in one central location. That does sound more manageable. But how do we make sure those credentials don't get compromised? I mean, if someone gets access to the vault, that's game over.
Right. That's where another one of PAM's strengths comes in. Automated credential rotation. Think of it like automatically changing the locks on your house regularly. Even if someone gets hold of a key, it won't be valid for long.
Okay, that's a pretty reassuring feature. So PAM is constantly updating and rotating those machine identities in the background, making it much harder for attackers to exploit them. But what about monitoring all this activity? How do we know if something suspicious is happening?
Well, PM has that covered too. It provides detailed audit trails, monitoring every access attempt, and flagging anything that looks out of the ordinary. It's like having a security camera that records everything happening around your most valuable assets.
Wow, so PM is really like having a 247 security detail watching over all my machine identities. That's pretty impressive. But you mentioned containers earlier, and I have a feeling that adds a whole other layer of complexity to this.
You're absolutely right. Containers, especially when managed by platforms like Kubernetes, bring a whole new set of challenges to the table.
Kubernetes. Just to make sure I'm following along, could you give me a quick explanation of what that is?
Sure. Think of Kubernetes as the conductor of an orchestra. It orchestrates all your containers, making sure they're deployed correctly, communicating with each other, and scaling up or down as needed. It's essential for managing large, complex, containerized applications.
Okay, that helps. So we have this conductor, Kubernetes, managing a whole orchestra of containers. But why do containers make machine identity security more difficult? It's still machines interacting with each other, right?
It is, but the way containers operate is fundamentally different from traditional servers. They're designed to be ephemeral, meaning they spin up, do their job, and then disappear, often within minutes.
Wait, so they're like pop-up shops in the digital world? Here 1 minute, gone the next.
That's a great analogy. And that makes managing their identities much trickier. How do you secure something that's constantly appearing and disappearing?
That does sound like a headache. So we have all these short-lived containers popping in and out of existence. What else makes them different from a security standpoint?
Well, alongside their ephemeral nature, containers are also incredibly scalable. They can multiply rapidly based on demand, like a city where buildings appear and disappear as needed.
Okay, now it's starting to sound like a security nightmare. How do you even keep track of all these containers, let alone manage their identities in a secure way?
It's a real challenge, and it's made even more complex by the way containers often communicate. They use something called a microservices architecture, where different containers are constantly interacting and exchanging information, like a complex network of couriers delivering packages. Each interaction needs to be verified and authorized, or you're opening yourself up to a huge attack surface.
So not only are these containers short-lived and constantly multiplying, but they're also chattering amongst themselves all the time. That sounds chaotic from a security perspective.
What?
Is PAM even up to the task in such a dynamic environment? Can our security superhero handle this?
Oh, PAM is definitely up to the challenge. It might not wear a cape, but it has the tools and strategies to handle even the most dynamic, containerized environments.
Okay, PAM fans, I'm ready for the comeback story. Tell me how it manages to keep things secure when everything's constantly changing.
Well, remember how we talked about centralized credential management being so important? Well, that becomes even more crucial in the world of containers. With all these ephemeral entities popping in and out of existence, having a central place to manage those identities, it's almost like trying to herd cats without a fence.
So even though the containers themselves are short-lived, PAM acts as a stable anchor, keeping track of all their credentials and permissions in one secure location.
Exactly. And automated credential rotation that we talked about earlier becomes even more critical here. Imagine you have a safe that's constantly being moved from place to place. You'd want to change the code frequently, right?
Makes sense.
Yeah.
You wouldn't want someone getting their hands on a code that's valid for weeks when the safe itself might only exist for a few minutes?
Right, and PAM takes care of that automatically, ensuring those container credentials are constantly being rotated, even if their lifespan is incredibly short. But it's not just about managing credentials. We also need to make sure each container has very specific access permissions. Just like in a large organization where different departments have different security clearances.
So we're still applying that principle of least privilege, even at the container level.
Absolutely. Fine-grained access control becomes even more important in these dynamic environments. We need to make sure each container can only access the specific resources it needs to do its job and nothing more.
Okay, I see how that would minimize the risk. Even if a container is compromised, the damage is limited because its access is restricted. But with everything happening so fast, how do we even monitor all this activity? It seems like trying to track a swarm of bees.
That's where real-time monitoring and auditing come into play. PAM provides that constant vigilance, tracking every interaction and flagging any suspicious behavior immediately. Think of it as having a sophisticated air traffic control system, but for your containerized environment.
So instead of reacting after the fact, PAM is proactively looking for potential threats as they emerge. I like it. But doesn't all of this create even more complexity for the people managing these systems?
That's a valid concern, but the good news is that PAM systems are designed to integrate seamlessly with orchestration platforms like Kubernetes. It's like having the security team work directly with the conductor to ensure everything runs smoothly and securely.
So PAM isn't just a standalone tool, it's actually part of the whole container orchestration ecosystem.
Precisely. It's about working with the tools and systems you already have in place to create a comprehensive and adaptable security posture.
This is all starting to make a lot more sense, but I'm curious about something. Earlier, we were talking about how even machines need a kind of digital passport to prove their identity. It made me wonder, what if we applied those same principles of zero trust and least privilege to our own digital lives? What would that look like?
That's a fascinating thought experiment. Imagine a digital world where every interaction, every request for access is treated with the same level of scrutiny and security as we apply to machines.
So instead of blindly trusting every email attachment or website link, We'd have systems in place to verify every piece of data, every request for access. It's like having a digital bouncer at the door of our online lives.
Exactly. And just like PAM for machines, we could have personal identity management systems that control access to our data, monitor for suspicious activity, and even rotate our credentials regularly.
That sounds incredibly secure, but also a bit overwhelming. Would we constantly be bombarded with verification requests?
Well, the key would be to make these systems user-friendly and unobtrusive. We wouldn't want security to become such a burden that it hinders our ability to use and enjoy the digital world.
Right. It's all about finding the right balance between security and convenience. No one wants to jump through hoops every time they check their email or browse the web. But if we could have a system that's both secure and seamless, that would be amazing.
Absolutely. It's a challenge, but it's a challenge worth tackling. The potential benefits are huge. A world where our digital identities are truly secure and where we can confidently engage online without fear of compromise.
That's a vision worth striving for. But for now, let's come back down to earth for a moment and talk about what our listeners can do today to enhance their own digital security. What are some practical steps they can take right now?
That's a great point. There are several things people can do today to make themselves less vulnerable, starting with the basics, like using strong, unique passwords for every online account.
I know it sounds like a broken record, but it's incredible how many people still use weak passwords or reuse the same password across multiple accounts. It's like using the same key for your house, your car, and your office.
Exactly. A strong password is your first line of defense. Make it long, complex, and unique. Don't make it easy for attackers to guess. And whenever possible, enable two-factor authentication. It adds an extra layer of security by requiring a code from your phone or email in addition to your password when logging in.
It's like having a second lock on your door. It might seem like a small step, but it makes a big difference in terms of deterring unauthorized access. What else can people do?
Be mindful of what you click on and what information you share online. Don't open email attachments from unknown senders, be wary of suspicious links, and think twice before sharing sensitive personal information on public websites or social media platforms.
It's all about being a discerning digital citizen, just like we're cautious in the physical world. We wouldn't open our door to a stranger, so why click on a link from someone we don't know?
Exactly. And remember, security is an ongoing process, not a one-time event. Stay informed about the latest threats and best practices, and be willing to adapt your habits as needed. The digital landscape is constantly evolving, and we need to evolve with it.
That's a great point. We can't just set it and forget it. We need to be constantly learning and adapting to stay ahead of the curve.
Absolutely. The more informed and aware we are, the better equipped we'll be to protect ourselves and create a more secure digital world for everyone.
This has been a fascinating conversation, and I'm sure our listener is feeling a lot more informed. But I want to leave them with one final thought. We've talked a lot about the technical aspects of security, but ultimately it boiled down to trust, doesn't it?
Absolutely. We need to think critically about who and what we trust in the digital world. Just because a website looks official or an email appears to be from someone we know, it doesn't mean it's legitimate.
So it's not just about having the right tools and technology, it's also about cultivating a healthy sense of digital skepticism. Don't blindly trust everything you see or hear online.
Exactly. Question things. Do your research. Make informed decisions about what information and services you trust with your digital identity.
That's a great takeaway. Security is ultimately about making informed choices and taking responsibility for our own digital well-being. We've been on quite the journey, exploring machine identity security in this deep dive.
Yeah, we have. We've gone from what a machine identity even is to the role of PAM to the unique challenges of those containerized environments. We even touched on what a zero-trust future might look like for all of us.
It really makes you think differently about, how we approach cybersecurity. And, as we've been discussing all this, something keeps coming back to mind. It's something that doesn't get talked about enough in security circles, but it's a huge factor. The human element.
Ah, yes, the human factor, the wild card that can make or break even the most sophisticated security systems. It's something we can't ignore.
Exactly. We can build the best firewalls, the most advanced intrusion detection systems, automate everything under the sun. But at the end of the day, humans are still the ones making decisions, writing the code, interacting with these systems. And humans, well, we're not perfect.
We are definitely not perfect. We get tired, we get distracted, we make mistakes, and sometimes those mistakes can have major consequences for security.
Think about it. We've all clicked on a phishing link we shouldn't have, or fallen for a social engineering scam at some point. Happens to the best of us.
And let's not forget about intentional actions. Insiders with legitimate access who abuse their privileges, whether for personal gain or even sabotage.
It's a sobering thought. So how do we address this? How do we account for the fact that humans are part of the equation, both as potential vulnerabilities and as the ones building and maintaining these security systems in the first place?
That's the challenge, isn't it? And there's no easy answer. I think the first step is like a mindset shift. We need to recognize that security is not just a technical problem, it's a human problem.
So it's not just about the technology itself. It's about the people who are using it, designing it, and making decisions about it.
Exactly. We need to invest in security awareness training for everyone, not just the IT folks. Everyone, from the average employee to the CEO, needs to understand the threats, the risks, and the best practices for staying safe online.
That makes sense. Because even if you have the best security practices in place, one weak link in the chain can compromise the entire system. But let's be honest, security training often feels like a chore. Boring presentations and generic advice that no one remembers.
I agree. We need to rethink how we approach security awareness. The training needs to be engaging, relevant to people's roles, and something they'll actually remember and apply in their day-to-day work.
So make it interactive. Maybe use real-world examples that people can relate to. Make it something they actually want to pay attention to.
Exactly. And we need to create a culture of security within organizations, where everyone feels empowered to report suspicious activity, to ask questions, and to speak up if something seems off. It's about creating an environment where security is everyone's responsibility, not just the IT department's problem.
Just like that. It's about moving away from a culture of blame and punishment when it comes to security breaches and creating a culture of learning and improvement. It's about learning from mistakes and making the whole system more resilient.
You've hit the nail on the head. And this all ties back to those principles of least privilege and zero trust that we talked about earlier. These principles are not just for machines, they're for humans too.
I'm seeing the connection here. We talked about how machines should only have access to the resources they absolutely need, and how we shouldn't blindly trust any machine's identity without verification. Those are good principles for us to follow as well.
Absolutely. We should be asking ourselves, do I really need access to this information? Is this level of access really necessary for me to do my job? By limiting our own access and questioning our assumptions, we can reduce the risk of human error and make it harder for attackers to exploit vulnerabilities.
It's like that old saying, trust but verify. That applies to the digital world just as much as the physical world.
Exactly. We need to be thoughtful, discerning digital citizens. Just as we lock our doors and are cautious about who we trust in the real world, we need to apply that same level of care and attention to our online interactions.
It's been an eye-opening deep dive for me, and I bet our listener feels the same way. I think what's really striking is that while the technology is fascinating and important, the human factor is just as crucial.
Absolutely. At the end of the day, security is about people. It's about protecting ourselves, our data, and our organizations from harm. And by working together, being mindful, and using the right tools and strategies, we can create a much safer and more trustworthy digital world.
This has been a fantastic discussion, and I want to thank you, our expert, for sharing your insights with us.
It's been my pleasure.
And to our listener, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into machine identity security. We hope you've learned something new and that you feel empowered to take control of your own digital security.
Remember, stay curious, stay vigilant, and stay safe.
Until next time.